fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
The House of Mystery, and I'm Al Warren, of course. If you don't know, you just haven't listened to anything good. And sitting in today is Brian Turnoff.
That is me, BJ Turnoff at your service, sir.
Oh,
not that type of service, but the other type of service, this type of service.
Well, lip service. And wow, what an interesting show already. Now, joining us today, we have an author, and we call her CS Poet. We call her CS Poe. She said to say anything, but anyway, Carol, thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, so this is really interesting. So you've been writing for a little while, but you wrote with Gregory Ash, and
I did.
We just had him on, I don't know, a week or two ago, and he was just saying some awful things about you. So. Oh,
I know. I read him the Riot Act after.
So how does that work? My God. No, so I find that really interesting. We're talking about writing with another author and the process. And you guys did it from a distance, right?
Right.
Like you didn't sit in the same room and write.
No.
So,
he's in St. Louis.
Yeah, the Arch. How do I say this? How do you get into that? Like, how do you do this over Zoom or whatever you're doing, or over phone or internet?
Well, we did it through Google Docs, so you can both be in the same document. I don't know. Like at first, it started off having to, phone conversations, talking about kind of the major beats of the story, what we wanted to do, what we wanted to accomplish. But like at a certain point, we just sort of like had some weird Vulcan mind meld going on. And we just sort of knew what to write in the moment. I mean, it was a very organic process. There was almost no pre-planning for the scenes, the dialogue. So we just sort of went with it. I mean, he would literally write a sentence or a paragraph, and then I just sort of intuitively knew when he was done, and I would just start writing. And that's how it worked. It was sort of wild for like 2 hours a day, every day until we finished.
Wow. That is really, really weird. I don't know how you...
It was an extremely weird process, but it was also really fun. And just working with him, he's so dedicated that it was sort of an inspiration and a creative boost to work with somebody like that. Because I am also a very slow writer, so getting anything done in 2 hours, I'm like, oh yeah, I have a page, but Greg's like, no, we'll have many pages. So I had to like sort of keep up with him, which was a struggle at times because I'm so slow in the way that I just sort of internally think it all through before I write it down. But it was nice working with someone who has a different mental speed than I do, because it helped me sort of jumpstart my own projects when I was sort of squandering off in the corner, because the end of 19 and into 2020 has not been kind to creative people.
You talked about before having a mind meld with him, but was there ever, working together, you may have different views on how maybe character should go, or I guess dialogue between them. Were there ever times where you guys were different on the way something should happen, and how did you get through those type of issues?
I'd say like if we had disagreements, they were pretty minor. And luckily in the Google Doc on one side, you can have a chat going. So if we really weren't sure, it was just a quick back and forth. Hey, what do you think of Rufus doing this or Sam doing that. No, I don't know, because what if we do this in the next scene? Oh, that works. I mean, it was really like nonchalant like that. There was never times where we were like, well, I hate you. We can't finish this because I just disagree with you too much. So
it wasn't the Beatles
that was
breaking
convenient. We just really sort of had the same ideas most of the time.
Well, that's just so. You see, I find this fascinating because you create these are fiction works of arts. So you're creating everything in that scene, in that book. So when you're doing that with someone else, how is it that, like, do you choose certain characters? Does he, or like
we each wrote one of the main characters. So he did one, I did the other, and that was basically, we were in charge of, I did all of my characters' dialogue and action, he did all of his, and then we just shared all the supporting cast, to the point that I actually am not sure who wrote some of them, because we just mixed and matched halfway through. So one character, half of it he wrote, half of it I wrote. We're editing right now, and I'm like, who wrote this dialogue? I don't know whether or not I can touch it, because I don't know who wrote it.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. So now, how do you develop your character? So when you took a character to write in this book, so did you put yourself in that character's place in it firsthand in your mind, so you become that character, and then you interact with the one that he has developed? Is that kind of how you do it, or is it just?
I really don't plan the characters that much. Like, I go in knowing, how they look, kind of how they sound, their name, maybe one major element of their backstory, but then everything else sort of grows pretty organically from that one initial concept. And I try not to plan too much of it ahead of time, because then I feel like I'll sometimes box myself in on an idea and I say, no, I can't change it because this was my original idea, when really that idea I had 70 pages in is much better. So I just kind of go with the flow. I know Greg plans his a lot more, but he kind of gave up control a little bit and just sort of worked a little bit more how I did, which I thought was very cool, because I would probably panic if I had to plan ahead of time.
So he was the bottom.
He trusted me and dove into the deep end, and I think he was not necessarily willing, but he did it.
Well, I mean, that's great. I think it's a learning experience as you go through these for everybody. It doesn't matter how much you've written or what it's always a new thing. So where does it come from for you? Where did it start for Carol? Like, when did you start actually putting words on paper?
I started seriously writing in junior high, knowing full well that what I was writing at age 11 and 12 was garbage, but knowing that if I practiced every single day, it would one day be good enough once I figured out how to tell a story.
Probably better than what I can even write right now, but your 11-year-old version.
Yeah. Oh man, I've seen some of those things. I was like, mother of God, this needs to be burned. But no, I wrote every single day for years, all the way through college and out of college, and then finally, after 15 years of writing just for myself to practice, I decided this was probably the moment that it was good enough that I could show it to somebody, and I started getting published in 2015.
Yeah, but what is the turning point for a writer in fiction for that confidence? So you said all of a sudden there was, I felt good enough.
I vividly remember the moment that it happened, but I'm not sure what it was that caused it. It was just sort of suddenly, it was a moment that I figured out what my voice was in storytelling, not just telling a story, but where you pick it up, and if you just read one sentence, you're able to go, oh, this is a C.S. Poe book, this is a Gregory Ash book, this is a Josh Lanyon book. You can just tell, And that was that moment where it clicked internally, and I said, oh my gosh, like, this is the style, this sort of short, simplistic sort of storytelling method that's very I have a background in film, so I think that my writing is very short and simplistic in its sentence structure, but it's very visual. And there's a lot of salt in the writing. And that, I think that moment when I kind of embraced just my curmudgeonness and put that into words with all my characters, and I was like, oh my God, this is me. This is unique. And I should just embrace it.
But isn't that the confidence in itself, maybe? Like in the fact that where you're confident enough to be yourself in a book where it doesn't feel like what you're writing is stupid, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was definitely the turning point. Everything else, I felt, well, this is just a story, and you had that imposter syndrome almost. But
right.
When I figured out that this is my thing, it was a very different, suddenly I'm very confident in my writing, and I take that with me, and I try to put that into my writing, that you always sense that the author is confident in the work that they're presenting, because I feel like it makes a better reading experience too, if you feel that you're in good hands for 200 pages.
Yeah, no, it's true. But do you look back now? Do you go back to some of your first books and read them now and kind of go, oh my, I would change that?
Well, it's funny that you say it, because I actually did have to do that at the beginning of 2020. I had taken my backlist back, and I republished everything. I self-published my backlist. So I had to reread like 14 or 15 books that I had written over the past few years and get them ready for new covers and formatting, and just make sure that everything was okay as I was putting them back out there under my own name and my own publishing company. And some of them are like, oh, well, that was the decision that I made, except that they're in audio, so I can't change the words, because then it will unsync itself from the audio, and it's a whole thing. But yeah, there were some instances where I was like, okay, well, nothing I can do about that.
Yeah. But do you think that's a normal process? But do you think even now, what you're writing today, in 20 years, you could look back and kind of go, well, I don't know if I would do it that way. Do you think that's normal? Yeah.
I think every book should be like that. Every book should always be better than the one I just put out. Even if it's just a little bit, even if it's just one thing that I figured out how to tell better or explain better or visualize in a reader's mind better, as long as that book was better.
Right. And so what's the most important thing to you in the writing? Is it the character? Is it the story? Or is it the actual prose or grammar or the wording?
I don't think there is any just one most important thing, because I could say, definitely the grammar, and then I'm like, no, the structure, no, the characters, no, don't forget the setting too, because that's also a character. So it's really, it's everything. I feel like to even let one of those aspects suffer, the whole book suffers. But I feel like especially is setting. I see so many people in so many books overlook the setting, and setting is a character. A Friend in the Dark was about Sam and Rufus, but it was also about New York City. And if we hadn't written New York City as a character, that would be a very different book, because your whole, your emotions and your visual cues and the gravity and depth are hidden in the setting. And to just not expand on that and make it a character, you lose so much, because it's a character that doesn't speak, but it sets the mood for everything.
Now, that's important. When you say a character that doesn't speak, so when you talk about the setting, now I write true crime, so I don't get to choose the setting. It is
Right.
what it is.
Right.
But I find this a really difficult process, is how can I have that setting speak to the readers, because without it sounding stupid. Do you know what I mean? Like there's...
Right. Oh, it's so important, even with nonfiction.
So how do you, so what's the key elements? Can you narrow that down? What would you say to someone if they're missing that?
A a piece of advice is, at least the advice that I follow for myself, I never like to say there's a hard and fast rule to do things, because if someone's telling you the correct way to write, then they're wrong, in my opinion. But the rule that I follow for myself is I never write about a location I haven't been to, because how do I actually know what it's like? How do I know what it sounds like and what the wind feels like when you're walking down the street? And how do I know what it smells like on trash day? All these little tiny characteristics that when you build it up, it creates this place that is wholly unique in a state or a country. Like New York, you can't just walk down the street of New York and there's so many little elements that make it what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's important. But so when you're walking down the street, when you're describing that, how do you choose your elements to display to the reader? What do you find?
It depends on the book. If I'm writing a sort of gritty mystery, like A Friend in the Dark was a fairly bleak story at times, pretty rough story. So we went for descriptions that were, I guess, grosser, like describing that dog poop caking on the cement in the August heat, which I wouldn't have used that description in the steampunk series I'm writing right now that also takes place in New York City, because it's the wrong flavor, it's too bleak and gross and dirty for what the atmosphere of the New York character is in a very different piece.
It's funny you use the word flavor with dog poop.
Well, it's got a very distinct one.
Yeah, well, there. Now, we were just talking to Austin Thomas Burton, and he said to say hi.
Yeah.
He said say hi. We're talking a lot about characters and how he and for him, there's a lot of characters that when he's reading people's books at times, they just don't seem believable. They don't seem real.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the conversation we had was talking about how there's a kind of a generic element that people create characters from a
character X has Y job, rinse and repeat.
Yeah. So how do you keep from doing that? Like when you're writing yours, how do you know it's kind of you're not falling into that that sort of trap?
Well, a lot of my characters, there's something about them that tends to be a more unique element. I have an amateur sleuth character who has a vision condition. He can only see in black and white, which is a real condition that also hinders how he can see in normal daylight. He has trouble reading fine print. This is not a condition I have, although it's something that I thoroughly researched for his character. And I feel that you don't need to have that condition in order to relate to his very real human insecurities or growths. And that's sort of something that I pull out for characters now and then. A character with narcolepsy, a character, in A Friend in the Dark with Greg, one of the characters has anxiety from his upbringing and how he's carried that into his adult life and what he does for a living. And I feel like that's just one thing that you can consider when you build a character is no human is born out of the womb perfect. No one is. And we all have something that makes us unique, whether it's, something that we struggle with or something that is something that makes us great in a way. We're all different. And I feel that that's something you need to keep in mind, because if you're trying to build a three-dimensional character, what makes him like everyone else on the street, but different at the same time, So
that's part of the research you do then?
Yeah, it's part of a lot of the research I do. I do way too much research.
Well, no, but I think that's important because I think that makes it the most believable in a book, right? Right? Because the worst thing in the world is going through a story and it's something that's really off, something that doesn't make sense, or some wording, or one of the things that bugs me the most. I was watching a series on Prime, and it was about the Jewish hunting old Nazis, and they would say things like, "Oh, thank you for your service" and all this stuff, and this is supposed to be happening back in the 60s.
Right.
They used phrases that are used today that were not used back then, and so it kind of wrecked.
I just got done writing a book that takes place in the 1880s, so I had to double check so many words.
Well, yeah, because if you're unaware, it doesn't matter. But then if someone is kind of aware of an area like a city,
it pulls you out. Yeah, you just realize it's just one place. Well, I can let a mistake or two go by, but if it's a plethora of modern slang and colloquialisms, did the author care?
Yeah, I could take a Starbucks cup in the back of Game of Thrones, but I can't take it. If they're talking.
That poor PA never got a call back for the next day.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean. You can only.
Yeah.
So I find that interesting. So now you're starting this series. I see it's coming out next month if all things are good. Called The Gangster. Now.
Yeah, it's the second book.
Okay, so what is this? Explain steampunk, that whole term, that whole idea, and especially in writing a book.
So steampunk it's a branch of sci-fi, but I like to describe it as sci-fi, but in the past. So it typically takes place during what would be the Victorian era, or a little into what would be considered the American Gilded Era. So in this case, I chose 1880 as a good sweet spot. I just like that decade a lot. And it's historically accurate to a point, and then you really screw it up by adding wild technology that doesn't exist in the time period. Think like Wild Wild West.
Okay, yeah.
It's like that, where there's normal technology of the time, and then suddenly you totally throw a wrench into the works by having a giant spider with a Gatling gun on its back chasing you down a street, or giant steam zeppelins that shouldn't exist at the time.
Like so that Alien and the Cowboys.
It's really, and the best thing about steampunk is that it can sort of be, as long as you kind of follow is it take place in the right time period, and does it have steam-powered technology, specifically steam? As long as you follow those two rules, it's sort of the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want, and that's what I think is so cool about that genre. And so in this case, my series takes place in New York City in the 1880s, and it follows a federal agent who, in this world, there's also magic involved, which some steampunk authors do, some don't. And he's a magic-wielding federal agent who is chasing down bad guys with the help of a vigilante.
Magic. So it's like witchcraft magic, or?
It's like elemental magic. It's like, he can cast lightning spells and fire spells. And he's chasing down bad guys who are building this grandiose illegal magic that they don't know how to control, and that it's going to do terrible things to the world, and he has to stop them.
And before you were talking about how, you only write about places that you've been to, and now, so this book is about magic. Are you, and obviously that's not going to apply to every facet of writing, what you do, but what about magic? Are you a practitioner, or have you heard from them and, kind of get what their opinion on, so you can make it as real as possible?
Oh no, this magic, I sort of just invented the system myself, but I applied a lot of science to it, because I guess I just couldn't do enough research for this series, as if writing something in the 1880s wasn't research heavy enough. I decided that I would also have the magic follow real rules of science. So I had to, half the time I was constantly looking up, all right, what's the melting point of silver? And what will react to electricity but not fire? And I don't know why I did this to myself, but I did.
Well, magic precedes science, right? So magic is the idea that, it's science that we just don't really have a good grasp of.
Right, yeah, and steampunk was sort of like the best genre to sort of combine the two, because that's sort of what steampunk is, where it combines history and then these fantastical elements. So it's like, you know what? Why not throw magic in there too and really mess with people?
Do you ever go to any of the, I have a couple of steampunk friends who do the whole, conference, circuit as well. Do you get dressed up and do the whole thing?
I've never gotten to go to one. I've always wanted to. I love the costumes and the attires and just how creative people are. Mm-hmm. And I would have loved to have gone if my lady, Miss COVID, had not graced us with her presence.
Ah, she's your mistress too.
Oh, boy.
She's a whore.
She gets around. My God.
She's a whore.
Especially in the United States here. I know Alan's in Canada, so they are doing okay. But yeah, over here, especially in New York, right, where you are.
Yeah, I'm in Manhattan, so.
Mm-hmm. Epicenter.
Yeah, they're talking about shutting things down again.
Yeah, it's strange because I'm in the west, so of Canada right now, and we had 45 new cases yesterday. So
that's nothing compared to here.
But
in all of Canada?
No, just in the west. But that's like, Vancouver's got a couple million and all the west. But you know what? So they put us on lockdown on that.
Wow.
It's mandatory. It's mandatory mask. We're level 3, so stores are open, but most of the restaurants and bars and
mandatory
all that.
Mask. Could we borrow your prime minister?
Well, it was real.
Like
simple.
That would even work here, even if they said you have to. Like they'd be like, yeah.
But what
Let me dream.
I don't
okay,
understand.
sorry. So didn't mean to crap on you.
I just don't understand what the issue is. Like when it's a lung infection. Yes, you can give it to someone, so put a mask on and it cuts it down. So how hard can that? What's the problem?
All I can think is I am very sorry that the public school system failed so many people on basic science and health. Yeah. That's all I can really think.
I don't know if I blame it on the school system. People just don't listen. I did some of my.
That too. I don't know.
The damn word anyone said in school. So but I get you. I get what you're saying. But I'm sure everybody's
not wearing masks.
We had an anti-mask rally in the city of Vancouver, and it's like 3 million people, and 20 people.
Didn't just like a few dozen show up?
Yeah, 20 people showed up. Wow. And it's like if people were walking by and going, "Oh, okay,"
oh, wow.
You spit on them.
No, you just kind of go, "What are these people doing?" And it's just like, "Are you okay?" That's kind of very Canadian. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'd give you a hug if there wasn't COVID.
Yeah, but it's strange because I don't understand the aggression held up against it, where you'd actually dress up, go downtown, and wear a sign.
I don't think most people do understand that. I don't ever want to understand it, put it that way. I'm happy to wear a mask.
Yes, it's not that big a deal. You get used to it, and it's kind of, now I don't even think about it.
I accessorized. I got masks with sparkles on them. I'm ready.
Mine's got a dinosaur.
See, there you go. You just add a little touch of personality to it, you're ready.
That is very surprising, Alan. I would have assumed it would have been something a little more sexual. If you haven't noticed, Poe, that he can turn anything sexual, anything regular into sexual in nature. So.
Well, I grew up with Howard Stern. I'm the gay Howard Stern. What can I say? It just comes natural. It's okay.
It's a gift.
Yeah, I just don't see the big deal. I don't.
Am I your Robin?
Yeah, you are.
Yes.
Yeah, except for the hair, but we can work on that.
Yeah, one day it'll come in.
Yeah. So now, steampunk, all this. So you've got this book coming out. Now, your characters. Let's talk about these characters. Again, do you draw from people people you've seen on the street? Maybe.
Oh, not even somebody who gets murdered? You're like, I hate this guy, so I'm going to get them murdered in my book right now. Like,
I think
that's a missing opportunity right there.
Maybe, but without sounding egotistical, I think my own creativity is more interesting than the people I pass on the street. So I don't tend to make characters based off of people I see.
Yeah, but okay, but wow. So how do you develop them? Like, how do you get them to be a real person?
Oh man, when I find out, I'll let you know.
Part of the magic.
It's part of I just finished the second book. It's in edits right now, and Greg can attest because he's heard all about the struggle of me finishing this book, but I was like 40 pages from the end before I actually figured out the big issue with the main character, like this emotional baggage that he had been carrying through the book. 40 pages from the end, and I'm like, mother of God, that's what it is? I had to go back and fix so many things. He's like, oh, that's great. I'm like, it's not great. I have to go back and fix 150 pages now.
Yeah, it's stressful. Edit's always hard.
I just sort of roll with it, and usually it comes from, I really like writing dialogue, and I think it might come from my background in film, where I worked on a lot of scripts, and film is very visual, and you carry a lot of the story through dialogue if you understand how to do it correctly and not info dump. But dialogue, even just like a passing comment between characters, is usually where I'll find that aha moment. So sometimes I just write, and I'll find it between pages 5 and 200, and it's usually through dialogue.
Wow, that's interesting. I find that fascinating. I couldn't imagine. That's a pretty special gift in a way, to be able to write like that, I think, because I don't know that I could.
It's an interesting process. It's a slow process.
Wow. So now, where do you see this going? Like, so this is the second book in this series. Do you find that you like writing series?
Oh yeah, I love series. This one is 4 seems to be my number of choice, so it's 4 books.
Now with the same character, you've got Special Agent Gillian Hamilton.
Yeah, Gillian Hamilton.
Gillian.
Yeah.
You say Gillian, I say Gillian.
Oh, I know. It's been a whole thing. I've had readers emailing me. Is it Gillian or Gillian?
Alan, I'm going to say go with what the writer says. I'm just on this one. Just saying.
No, I'm taking my mask off now. But what? Well, I mean, that's a whole other story, right? When you get the people writing into you. But,
oh, yeah.
But how do you, so you have to take this character and develop them book to book to book to book.
Yeah.
And you still have to hold on to what they've done in the previous books.
Yeah. And I have a terrible memory, so.
Oh.
Luckily you write it down, so you're good.
Oh, God. But it's so boring to go back and read it for like the umpteenth time because you're not really sure what you're looking for, but you know you wrote it. You should probably revisit it.
Yeah, because I think that would be important. I would think that you'd want to, because there's nuance, there's little things that you've done with a character in a book, and then a next book, and then wait till you get to the third book, and
oh my gosh, I know.
And certain things, certain likes or dislikes or things they've said, because you're doing dialogue.
Yeah,
you have to make sure that it's consistent. I would think that would be the challenge.
Yeah, sometimes what I actually did this time is, luckily a lot of my books are in audio now, so when I was taking breaks, like when I stopped to make lunch or something, and I knew that something I needed to know was in the first book, I was playing the audio of the first book and just listening to it while I was making lunch. And I was like, oh, that was what he said. Okay, now I know. So I didn't have to like page through it trying to figure out what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So that's a plus for audio.
Yeah, well, yeah. Oh, actually, I love Audible. They know that. I've got hundreds of books because I had cataract surgery, and all I do is listen now.
Oh, I love audio too.
Yeah, it's just crazy, and they've gotten so good. So
yes. Oh my God, some of these narrators are so talented.
Yeah, there's some real good ones out there. I'm pretty impressed. Some of the early ones it was kind of hit and miss. But
yeah, I have one of those right now. I have one of those right now, and they're just making this great book just absolutely awful, and it's just a real trudge. But yeah.
What's that? Is that one of my books?
I didn't want to say it, but Alan does actually narrate his own books too. I don't know if you know.
I know, that'd be the day. No, past that, no. Wow. So this is great. So what would your advice be to someone that's just starting to write? You've got so many books out now. What would you say to someone that's never been published, but they're interested in following this up? What's your biggest piece of advice?
Practice. Do not write one book and think that you are ready to smack a price tag on it. You should most likely want to throw that one away and hide it from anyone ever seeing it. And that's sort of the whole point. You want to be better than that first one. You don't want to write a book, self-edit it, and put it up for 99 cents in Kindle Unlimited, because it's not fair to you. It's not fair to readers. It's not fair to your creative growth. You need to keep writing, keep practicing, and trust your gut when you think, okay, this is the moment that I should take that step.
So an editor is very important, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Please don't cut corners on editors.
Yeah, no, it's a huge position. If someone asks me, I always say, yeah, get an editor. Make sure you got
Absolutely.
an editor that challenges you as well.
Yes.
That has no problem telling you,
Yeah.
oh, this and that, or I like this, or this doesn't work.
Yeah, and it's okay to not, to trial and error. Like, yeah, maybe that editor just didn't work for you. Maybe they just didn't get your voice or your style, and that's totally fine. But when you do find that right editor, they are only trying to make you better. Don't take it personally.
Yeah, they're just trying to make a better book. In a way, you write the story and they write the book in that part, right? That's so important. So important. How do you find this? So you talked about it a little bit earlier, but I find this interesting with COVID and with 2020 and all the stress. You got the president that's a dingbat. You've got you've got all this stuff going on. You had protests. You had.
It's been a year. I think I aged about 20 years.
Oh yeah, easy. And but I was going to say, so when you're writing, does it get into your writing? Like, I know you're not going to write about COVID in the 1800s. It's not. But does the stress of what's around you seep in somehow? Does it become more dark or negative in your writing?
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about that earlier, actually. I think the stress and sort of just the general doom and gloom of the past year, it slowed me down creatively. But I think it probably, I'm trying to think back on things I've written this year, and I think that might have darkened a little bit of what I wrote, for sure. I'm definitely not, even my contemporary stuff, I have no interest in including COVID in any of my writing. But I think just the atmosphere definitely seeped into some of the word choices.
Well, I would think it would have to, because even in your day-to-day life, like when stress is going on around you with other things, even in a year that 2019 when there wasn't COVID, that ups and downs are going to affect your feelings, and that affects your dialogue and writing, I would think.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Especially anything prolonged is really going to start seeping in. COVID has been prolonged.
Hey, this is a really good idea. So on book 3, in 1881, Gillian discovers that they're creating a virus called COVID.
Genius.
Oh my God.
Genius.
Oh man.
And they hide it away for the year 2020. Yeah. You see, this is why I don't write. Yeah, this is why I don't write fiction.
Yeah, stick to true crime, respectfully.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that,
Crime is stranger than fiction.
the truth definitely is. Well, have you ever thought about that? You talk about crime a lot in your books. Have you ever thought about kind of going over to the true crime genre?
I haven't. I don't have the interest in writing it, but I definitely love reading and watching and learning about it. Because man, there's some wild stuff going on out there where I'm like, honestly, if I put this in a fiction book, someone would call me out and say it wasn't believable, and it actually happened.
Well, it's true.
Which I'm sure you probably, Alan, would feel where you're reading something or researching something and you're like, really?
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, not so much now. Years ago, yeah, but now it's sort of...
You've hardened?
I sort of have. I don't know that I've hardened, but I'm not surprised anymore. I've seen too many nut jobs talk to them in person. I've seen too many... it's just things that you would go, yeah, that's ridiculous. And then... Yeah,
you're like, I'm not surprised that I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Almost like it's just crazy stuff that you think, oh, that's really, it's far-fetched. It's stupid, right?
And you have a book about... I'm sorry, I'm totally blanking on his name. Colonel Russell? Is that his name?
Yeah.
I watched a show about him, so when I saw your book, I was like, oh my god, I know this guy.
Yeah, I know.
That was one of the crazier ones I had watched, too. I was like, wow, this guy made a lot of choices in his life.
Yeah, actually, and that's probably my best-selling book ever because... Yeah, I've done shows on it. And
it was fascinating.
Well, the thing is, too, and then it's in the third printing, and this is
oh, wow.
Yeah, and this is we went with the new cover for this version. I've caught so much flack for this cover.
Really? But they're real photos. Like,
yeah, you shouldn't put yourself on the cover. So,
well, no, you see, because when I was with the original publisher that did it small little, it was part of a series, and it did so well that they got into second print, and then they did a really nice cover, and it went on its own. But with the third cover, I said to them, listen, it's the cover you do is boring. There's just nothing to it. And they said, yeah, but what do you want? And I said, well, I want to show both sides of this guy. Yeah,
he definitely was a dichotomy.
Yeah.
He took the pictures himself,
Yeah, so. and I think that's important. So it happened and it came out, and now I get 20 to 200 messages a day now.
What?
In the last week. And
oh my gosh.
Really, really abusive.
Wow.
Negative. Just crazy. I had someone, even in the gay groups, I had to take it out of a lot of the gay groups that I'm in, because as a writer, and I even talked to a couple of the administrators and saying, I cannot believe this. There's this book cover, they said, makes transsexuals look like it's a disease and it's a sickness, and I'm getting all that sort of stuff, and I'm thinking, well, the book cover shows two sides of a guy, a person, and what he did. He was not transsexual. He was not a transvestite.
He wasn't transgender at all.
No, he wanted to masturbate in the female's clothes, and then he filmed it, and whatever the case. I'm not a psychiatrist, but this is what he did. I can't change
the fact is that they were his own photos, and it wasn't a statement on anything. It was just
how it is.
Thing that he had done.
Yeah, he makes bathing suits look good.
That's an interesting reaction. I wouldn't have expected that.
Neither did I. You would not believe how many bad comments on the cover. And I'm taking it.
Maybe they should read the content and find out
that's my
why
opinion.
The cover is the way it is.
Yeah, and that's my opinion, and I think that's what they should. But at the same time, I don't want to get into this argument with people.
Yeah.
I'm sort of sitting back.
Exhausted.
Yeah, sitting back, let it kind of go. And I guess in a way, of course, the publishing agency says, well, this is great. It's back in the top 10, and it's like,
one of those, marketing's bad marketing kind of situation.
And I was happy with this. I was really happy with the cover. But so people, so how does that make you feel, like when you're getting feedback that you didn't expect necessarily?
Most of the time, for fiction, it's definitely different.
Right. Yeah.
Most people who go out of their way to message me usually only have something nice to say, which I really appreciate because, you know, at a certain point, who wants to have the mental headspace for people attacking you? I've really only recently had one very negative comment, but it was somebody who told me that because the steampunk books, Gillian and Gunnar, are two gay men in the 1880s, and that's something that I explore as a sort of a subgenre, is their relationship on top of action and adventure and explosions, and also what these two have to go through to be together. And this gentleman went out of his way to email me to let me know that he was very disappointed that I was pushing an agenda. So I responded by making the second book even more gay than I had initially planned.
Which no one thought was possible, but somehow
Which no one thought was
did
possible, but I did it. And I was very proud of myself.
Well,
and that's really it. You know, the only times that I really hear something negative, someone has their own agenda to push, whether it's, oh, the cover model wasn't hot. All right, that's fine, but I didn't ask your opinion. And, well, you're pushing an agenda with the content. Sure, I'm pushing a positive relationship between two human beings. I will now make it more gay. Thank you.
Well, I don't really understand that because there's a underlying current that everything has to have an agenda. Well,
right.
She's obviously a socialist.
Yeah. I was like, I thought I was just trying to write a good book, but man, this guy, he reminded me more gay.
Yeah, where's the cock?
Yeah, right? All right, let me put that right in there. I got to find a different word, something more socially acceptable to the 1880s, but, you know.
Well, you know, I would think that would be interesting in the sense that how that was an illegal relationship back then, right?
Yeah, you know, there's so much history at that time period where it wasn't entirely illegal in certain places that you were. And in New York City, you had the Bowery, the street where there were these nightclubs and these places that you could go if you were LGBT, and it was a safe place to be. And that was also the time that apartment buildings were starting to become a thing. They were called hotel apartments. And they were for single men because there was an influx of single men in society, and they didn't have wives, they didn't have families, and they didn't really have anywhere to live. So these hotel apartments started to come about, and they were these private dwellings, and there's the suggestion that they became something more because they were private homes for men. And it was almost like, it's okay if you just don't talk about it. But then once, you know, police started raiding all the clubs on the Bowery, it became more talked about and shunned about. And then by the turn of the century, that's when you had, you know, a lot of negative slang coming out. And then by the 1900s and then into the 1920s, that's when everything just went really downhill. And then, you know, the 1950s with the all-American family and 2.5 children, and then having to recover from that. But in the 1880s, it was almost okay in this weird sort of gray zone. You just couldn't really talk about it, but it was almost okay in a big urban environment.
They were just bachelors.
Exactly. They were just, you know, confirmed bachelors living in their own little hotel apartment, quite discreet and quiet.
But you see, that I think that's what makes a story interesting, is when you you learn something as well. There's something about the history. There's something about the place they were at.
I actually was reading a book for some of the research. It's called Gay New York, I think. And it's literally about gay New York from like the 1890s until like the 1920s. Fascinating. Highly recommend it. I do believe it won a Lambda Award.
Yeah, I think I was probably in it back in 1910. I'm that old. So when someone reads your book, they pick up one of your books, they read it, and is there something you want them to get out of the book other than the story or the characters and that sort of part of it? Is there an underlying theme in here?
You know, it's something on one hand, because again, I mentioned film. Back in film school, there was two types of students. There was the artiste and there was the Hollywood kid. The Hollywood kid just wanted to tell a fun story, make a good movie. And the artiste did not like the Hollywood kid because they were quote unquote sellouts, and only the artists could tell a good story and make it believable, because I don't know what their thought process was behind that. But I was one of the Hollywood kids, and they always, even my own teacher told me I would never make a good story, never make a good movie, because I was selling out, making just a Hollywood film. And I realized there's nothing wrong with telling a fun, exciting story, whether it's my amateur sleuth literally falling into a dead body, or this, steampunk action adventure in the 1800s. It really doesn't matter what it is, as long as I commit to making it fun and try in even the smallest way to make sure that a reader saw themselves in a character, and they don't have to have, that exact thing that the character has that they relate to, but just that those emotions the character felt through the books were real enough that someone else would have I felt that way in my life, whether it was because they were gay, or because maybe they had anxiety, or just by being alive. As long as they had fun reading it and felt seen in that character, to me, that's a good book. And that's all I want to do.
Wow. Now, do you have a website or a place that you want people to come stalk you?
Well, I do have a website. It's really easy, cspo.com. And I'm on a lot of a lot of social media, like Facebook, Twitter.
Yeah, I did notice that you were on Twitter, and I also couldn't help notice that you retweeted Moon Pie's.
Moon Pie saved me.
Yeah, I like you. I'm a moon Pie lover, and Alan Warren, stop your jokes there. But yes, I appreciate your Moon Pie tweeting. So you could be found on Twitter, by the way.
Oh,
under Moon Pie.
Where I'll be retweeting Moon Pie, screaming into his pillow.
Do they pay you in free Moon Pies? Because that would be a hell of a deal.
I would be retweeting them a lot more if they would send me a box.
I've never had a Moon Pie.
Oh, shame. Or you really got to do it. I'm going to send you one. That's it. I'm writing it down.
Yeah, old Moon Pie. Well, what we'll do is we'll put your website up as well as your books.
Thank you.
And people can do one click if they're listening. And again, it's been great. We've been talking to author Carol Poe, otherwise known as C.S. Poe. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.